Hello, hello, hello. How's everybody doing? I don't know who we have here right now, but this is the start of the first stream. We have actually gone live. This is the first start. Let me introduce myself. I am Wisdom Hunter, so I am starting this whole project for Barbaric Fantasy. Got a Discord going, Twitch stream, YouTube channel, be showing the videos, and getting a community involved around Barbaric Fantasy. Why? Why are we doing Barbaric Fantasy? Don't we have enough fantasy? Isn't there enough? Aren't there enough stories? These are stories that aren't being told in role-playing games enough. D&D 5e is the main game system out there, and Pathfinder. But if you look at those two systems, they both have a lot of magic. They have a lot of fantasy. Crazy kind of stuff. Comical stuff. Things that you can make cartoons about, right? But when you get down to this barbaric fantasy, how is it different? And it's different in that you have real people, real cultures, real struggles in the history of different cultures growing into civilization. This is blood. This is sweat. This is our history as far as the world. This was a time when you had old-growth forests throughout the world. The rivers were clean and pure and you could drink. You had grasslands in the deserts that will eventually be gone. This was a world ripe with nature. And there were people living in this world, but they didn't have civilization, they didn't have civilized cities, they didn't have universities, they didn't have cars, they didn't have technology. But they were building a world. In this type of scenario was real. But at the same time, there was this element of fantasy to it. Superstition, magic. There were witches. There were people who thought that spirits could roam and possess people and all kinds of things. Magic. And people were scared of magic, that if they thought someone had magic, just that belief would create magic in their lives. These stories are part of our history. Now you look at the D&D 5th edition stories and Pathfinder stories and things like that. Those stories create a whole fantasy world of elves, dwarves, halflings, things that really didn't exist. So we have to create them. We have to imagine them. And the magic in those games is fanciful, it's exuberant, it's exaggerated. What you can do and how you can do it and how fast you can do it. And it's like when you start playing in those games of Pathfinder and D&D, you don't even realize you're doing such powerful magic. You don't even realize where you're going to combat and you start doing magic and your opponents just keep on fighting, swinging away. You're trying to maintain their action economy. But nobody really pays attention to this incredible magic that's being displayed by the spellcaster. But in barbaric fantasy, magic is real, but a lot of it is based on the belief of people. Do they believe it? How do they respond to it? What is the thoughts that people have about this magic? Is it their mind playing tricks on them? Is it real? Is it because they believe it? These types of elements are what make magic, but it's the real kind of magic that we can understand with our own minds. Not that we have to create fantasies of realities that are unreal. So this is barbaric fantasy. Armies, warriors, fighters, rogues, thieves, pirates. People roaming the deserts, pillaging caravans, doing all that kinds of stuff. This was the past. The Silk Road. They used to go from China all the way across the continents, bringing trade. That was real. But think about living on the Silk Road with your caravan going through the mountains and the deserts, traveling thousands of miles, bringing goods from China to other parts of the world. Campfires at night, cooking your food, telling stories, singing songs. That's the type of element that we're capturing in barbaric fantasy. It's a less civilized world. That's barbaric. It's just less civilized. But it's fantasy that's appropriate to a less civilized world, to that mindset of looking up into the stars at night and being able to imagine anything. It's the mind's freedom within the world that we live. D&D and Pathfinder and games like that, they tried to create a different world beyond what we live in here. So barbaric fantasy is this level of play that really brings in this human struggle, cultures, the past, superstitions, gods, spirits, demons, sorcerers, evil, good, survival, slaves, slavers, governments, thieves. It was a hard time to live, but at the same time, there was all this growth and potential of discovery and mystery. You could travel anywhere in the world. You could walk across borders. There was no passport. There was no officer at the border saying, okay, you're now crossing from this country to this country. Give me your papers. No. This was a world you could just walk across and meet people. You could just keep walking, go to the next town, and there'd be a different culture there. Maybe they'd speak a different language. You learn their language, talk with them, live with them for a while, move on. This happened all the time. So barbaric fantasy takes this world, puts in ruins, puts in ancient palaces, puts in cultures, tribes, wilderness, vast wilderness of old growth forests, tropical forests. And you venture through this world with species that have still not yet gone extinct. And you live in this world as it was made before civilization came in and changed it. And we get back to that true heart, that true nature of who we are. So we're exploring barbaric fantasy to bring out that essence of our being that is less civilized, but at the same time searching to be civilized, reconnecting with that space of our ancestors. So that is a little bit about what barbaric fantasy is. Now, everybody's going to have a different opinion on that. That's why we have a Discord channel, so people can come together, share their opinions. What do they think barbaric fantasy is? What is the appropriate level of magic? What is the appropriate level of whatever in that type of world in order to play a game in it? How do you create stories in that game, in that genre of barbaric fantasy? What is a story that would fit? Now, we're basing this barbaric fantasy upon Conan stories and the Xena stories. These are warriors. These are barbarians. They had to live by steel. They had to live by their stealth, by their cunning and their ability to fight and survive. That is barbaric fantasy. What about the sorcerers in those stories? They had power. They could control minds. They could cast fire. They could create illusions. So there are types of magic that fit into those stories. Even if you go back to the stories of Conan, the sorcerers would manipulate the minds of the people because the people, through generations, believed that sorcerers had power, so the sorcerer could do anything, and the people's minds were not prepared to resist that. They just accepted it and were affected. But in those stories, Conan would go into those areas where the priests and the monks had control of the minds of the people. And Conan would look around and think, what's going on here? I don't believe this. This isn't part of who I am. I don't believe this magic. And so he wouldn't be affected by the magic. That's a secret to how magic works. If you lose your sense of defensiveness against magic, it can affect you. So you build that into the game mechanics. So all these little things you do. So we have homebrew to develop these games, these role-playing games for Barbaric Fantasy. Now, there is a game system out there from Modifius Entertainment. It's a 2D20 system where you have to roll 2D20s or 3D20s, how many D20s you have, and try and get a certain number of successes. And that's one system that the people have tried to build around to simulate these worlds of Conan. So that's the Conan role-playing system. It's called Adventures in an Age Undreamed of. And so there's people playing that. It's not a well-known system. It's not nearly as popular as D&D 5e, where you have tens of thousands of people going crazy about that. But you get into the Conan role-playing game with Modifius, and there's just a select few people, really diehards fans for Conan, getting these books and playing the games. But there's not enough, because it's a different game system. So at some point in time, you have to open up the stories of Xena and Conan. You have to open up these stories and get more people involved by using a different game system. So this is what I've been working on, is developing homebrew between D&D 5e, another system called Low Fantasy Gaming, Middle Earth by Cubicle 7, the Conan role-playing game, mixing these all together so that they each have their input into creating a game system that can create the world of Conan and Xena. You reduce the magic, you give some more power to the warriors and the fighters and the ranger, and you create these stories. This is where we're going with this. This is where we're going to be going with Barbaric Fantasy. It has a long tradition. A long tradition of, let me go ahead and put up another slideshow here. So, I wanted to be here for about 30 minutes tonight. Today, wherever you are, evening. I wanted to put up about 30 minutes on this stream and talk about Barbaric Fantasy and talk about where we want to go with this. And the basic idea is that there aren't enough people playing these Barbaric Fantasy type games. Xena, for example, in the late 80s or early 90s, they tried to come out with a role-playing game for Xena, but it was all just pictures and fluff, and there was no real game mechanics to it, and it just lasted, I don't know, a few books. And the books were not very well printed either. They weren't very attractive, the books. They weren't printed well. And so the Xena role-playing game system never got off and started doing anything. They just printed a couple of books, tried to sell them, and that was the end of it. There was really no game system there. There was really no adventures. It was just kind of a publicity thing for Xena. And Conan role-playing has had, I think, about 3 or 4 different attempts to really try and get it going. There's been a Conan 1 version, then a Conan 2 version, and now we have the Modifius version of Adventures in an Age Undreamed of. And the previous versions weren't that well developed. They had some great stories and a lot of material, but at the same time, it really didn't catch on because D&D was getting so strong. And then when Modiphius took over and created the 2D20 system, it was kind of a select few that got hooked into it. There was a select few people that liked it and that wanted to do with it, and they were willing to put up with all the different mechanisms that you had to do within the 2D20 system. So, where are we going with this Barbaric Fantasy RPG project? Is to get more people involved in the stories, to get these stories into the game systems that they're using, get these stories converted to D&D, to Pathfinder, wherever it needs to go to get more people involved in these stories. Because there are people out there that want to get involved in these stories. There are people out there who want to play these adventures, but they're not written for the game systems that they're using. The most popular, most common game systems, they're not using their game system because the stories of Barbaric Fantasy aren't written for their game systems. D&D 5e, you'll have these high fantasy, exaggerated magic, exaggerated fantasy. These games have the adventures written for that game system. But you have to play high fantasy, where you have turtles transporting from one mountaintop to another. That's just high fantasy. But then you have to take this barbaric fantasy and get it into a game system, and you just can't have people teleporting all over the place and all the high fantasy magic that exists in D&D 5e. You can't do it. You have to homebrew it down. You have to convert it down to a world that doesn't work that way. And that's what we're doing in this Barbaric Fantasy project, is we're creating stories and the game mechanics in a diverse way so that more people can get access to these types of stories. Low Fantasy Gaming tried to do it. That was a project from a guy in Australia. In Low Fantasy Gaming, he brought down magic to try and create these low fantasy type atmospheres. But it was still too medieval. It was still too Renaissance. It wasn't barbaric enough. There was still too much civilization in those stories that they were presenting. We're taking it back to this raw nature of traveling and exploring the world on ships and on foot and on horseback and being free to explore, where treasures and riches were all over the place. We're taking it all the way back to that barbaric environment. And in this, for example, in Low Fantasy Gaming, you'll have heavy armor because they had chivalry. They had knights fighting in armor with big swords, and they'd stand next to each other and slap each other with the swords, hitting their armor because they didn't have much mobility in that heavy armor. And then you take one of these fighters with heavy armor, you put them in a barbaric environment where you're having to travel and fight. Carrying around the heavy armor just didn't make sense. It was goofy. It would just simply look goofy. That if you walk into battle, if you're surprised during the night when you're camping out, and they come and attack you, and you've got your heavy armor on, it's just goofy. And then things that move fast can move around you super fast and be able to take you and be able to attack you, but maybe they can't hit you because you have all this armor on, but you're not going to be able to move well at all with this heavy armor on. So in the barbaric environment where you're fighting in nature and you're fighting in the moment, the heavy armor just doesn't make sense. And that's another thing that sets barbaric fantasy off from like Low Fantasy Gaming or D&D 5e, those types of stories, is that you don't have that chivalry of heavy armor. You just don't have it. Leather. Your armor is leather. Your armor is maybe some chainmail, a chainmail shirt, a helmet, and maybe some armor over your shoulders and around your torso, but you need your legs free to move and walk and transport yourself. You need to stay somewhat light, so you have to have this balance that certain parts of you are just not going to be armored that well. because you need those parts of your body to work better, like they would without heavy armor. So this is the barbaric fantasy world. You have fighters that don't have heavy armor, and because they don't have heavy armor, their AC is going to be lower. Okay, so what do? Well, you have to boost up some of their other stats. In my case, I boost up their superiority die and their other bonuses. I stack them up. I give it more power. I give them more so that they become more powerful and don't have to depend on their AC to be as high to last as long in battle. They're going to be more powerful. So you have to make these different conversions in the stats when you start building different characters for this type of world. And that's how it's working. That in order to create these different types of worlds where you have to change the magic, you have to change the armor, you have to change the weapons, you have to change how people relate, you have to create different game mechanics. And that's what this project for Barbaric Fantasy is all about, is creating and presenting a game system that people can share, people can be familiar with, and have fun in these types of stories. That's where we're going with this project. So we're going to have a YouTube channel. We're going to have a Discord. We have the Twitch channel here. We're going to be doing some games. I'm still looking for a couple of players. Looks like we got about 2 so far, from what I see. And we'll be streaming here on Twitch the games. And the way I'm going to do it is that the players are going to create their characters in this world. They could be pirates, they could be priests, they could be thieves, they could be tribesmen, they could be raiders coming across the desert, they could be nobility, they could be farmers. There's so many things that you can do and still be able to function in this world. So they create their characters, and then once their characters are created, then I'll write the story for those characters. Put them where they need to be in the world, and develop a story around who they are. So within the next 2-3 weeks, we'll have a game up and running here on the Twitch. And we got a question here from Star Fox. Hello, Miss Star Fox. Hello there. I am so excited for this. Yeah, Mrs. Star Fox, I have a question for you. If you want to see what I want to do for these games is, well, I'll get with you later on this. But there's a project I want to do, but we may not start doing it right away. But yeah, this is exciting. This has been a project that's been in the works for a number of years. I've been watching role-playing games, studying all kinds of homebrew everywhere, creating my own homebrew for over 10 years now, test playing it, doing it, having fun with it. But it just got to the point where what is missing in the role-playing? And it was this barbaric fantasy. It exists, but it's never been well developed. It's never been so available and so easy to get into that a lot of people could do it. And so that's what we want to build into this. And we're just starting. Here we are right now on the Discord page. It's been up 2 or 3 days. And we've got a handful of members coming in. So we just started. And I wanted to get on this stream and start working this. This is the first time I've streamed on Twitch. Personally, this is the first time I've been on Twitch. I've never been on a game or anything like that, but I have GM'd games. I've been a GM on Roll20 for a number of years and done many games on there. But now I'm going to switch it up and start presenting these homebrew rules for Barbaric Fantasy. This has never been done before. As far as my homebrew, I've never done this before on a Twitch stream, so this is going to be new. So we're getting together. Like what you're going to be seeing right now on the screen right there is naval combat between boats. It's a system I worked up to show how the boats can move as the wind conditions change. And you have these different rolls that you have to do to move the boat. So in Roll20, it actually works very fast, but I needed a game mechanic that worked better than what I was reading in the books. I needed something, because I've been a sailor. I've sailed catamarans. And I know how boats function. I know how boats move. So I needed a mechanic to fit that, but I needed it to be simple. So I created a mechanic to do that. So, and that's going to be part of these stories. Part of these stories is going to be pirates. The pirate boats going out into the ocean, and the pirates come to try to attack your boat, or you are on a boat because you are a pirate, and you wanna pursue one of these other boats, these trading boats that go across the ocean with all kinds of merchandise, and you want to get into that boat and you want to take out that merchandise because you're pirates. Well, you're going to have to go into a naval battle. You're going to have to track down that boat. Well, so you get on that boat and you start rolling dice. See if you can catch that boat. If you can't, that boat will escape and their merchandise will make it to the next port. That's how the game is played. And there's ruins all over this world from past civilizations that crumbled over the millennium. Thousands of years of cultures and civilizations trying to grow and develop and then collapse. The Mayans grew and collapsed. The Aztecs grew and then the world changed for them. But throughout history, you've had lots of civilizations come and go, leaving behind ruins with tombs and treasures, artifacts, mysteries, magical items, all kinds of things that you can be walking through the forest, or you can be walking through a tropical forest, and all of a sudden stumble upon some ruins that have been covered over by plants. And there's your story. And then within those ruins still exist animals and creatures from times in the past. That is barbaric fantasy. Even in the stories of Conan, you had dinosaurs. There's Red Nails. I think is the story where you have dinosaurs attacking Red Sonja and Conan up on a cliff, if I'm not mistaken. But this is the story. This is barbaric fantasy. And these are stories that you're going to feel blood. You're going to feel the effort that you have to put into to get from one place to another. In my games, I run a mechanics where when you wake up in the morning, you got to roll for exhaustion. And if you fail that roll, you're going to be exhausted starting out that day because you're traveling across these huge landscapes. And the weather can change on you. And maybe you found food, maybe you didn't. And you can wake up with exhaustion. And when you wake up with exhaustion, it's going to affect the rest of your day. And if you get into a surprise encounter for a combat, that exhaustion level is going to be affecting that. And that's the reality of the game. And in my game, in my homebrew, when you wake up, you don't get your full hit points. You get half. So every day you wake up, you get half of your hit points. So if you have a big battle, you may need 2 to 3 days to get back all of your hit points. Assuming you don't get into more battles and start taking more damage, falling, taking damage, walking through some poisonous plants and taking damage. There's lots of things that will give you damage. And it's going to take you some time to rebuild those hit points. And while you're rebuilding those hit points, you got to be careful. You still got to move. You still got to do the things, but you got to be careful. So it's a different way to play. It's more barbaric. It's more walking through the mud, walking through the rain, trying to survive, finding your food, and then getting to these places that are just ancient, full of dust and moisture, mold, and little things crawling around. Insects, centipedes, snakes, spiders, and trying to survive. So this is barbaric fantasy. And I'm excited on this. And I can see here that Miss Star Fox, who I actually watched some of her Twitch stream channel today, and I'm excited to get her involved in this project because I can see a lot of potential there in her ability to bring things to the table as far as a game being streamed on Twitch. So, yeah, Mrs. Star Fox, I've got my eye on you. I want you to play in the game. I'll tell you that right now. I want you to play in the game, and I want you to have fun getting into these worlds. Because these worlds are so simple. You don't have to have anything elaborate with, like if you go into D&D 5e, you have the Tomb of Annihilation, where the players will have to go through the tropical jungle all the way to where the bad guy is. And when you get there, there's all kinds of machines moving and technology, and so you have to create these elaborate systems to try and trick and manipulate the environment for the players. So you have to create all these elaborate things. But in barbaric fantasy, you leave it simple. Chains, a huge snake, your enemies. You don't need any type of elaborate technology to make it look cool. You just don't need it. You keep the story simple and barbaric so that you have the creature, you have the treasure, you have you against them. What can you do to get that treasure? What can you do to beat that monster? And you don't have to figure out any sort of technology. You just have to figure out the secrets and move your way through. It's very raw. It's in the moment. And those battles are tooth and nail. Your flesh. I am researching for my character right now, Mrs. Star Fox says. Yeah, for my game, I have a document with a whole list of backstory options that come from the Conan system. They're called archetypes and castes. And you use these archetypes and castes to create backstories for your characters. And there's a huge list of these things. A huge list of these things. This is the one thing about the Conan role-playing system from Modiphius. It's an improvement upon the two previous versions because it takes all this information about Conan and simplifies it, but gives it so much diversity at the same time. So it's easier to actually read it. It's easier to actually assimilate it and use it for your character creation. And that's what I do is I use those Modiphius Entertainment books to create characters, and then those characters can go into any game system. And that's the goal here, is to get the adventures and the characters into any game system. The game system is just a way of playing the adventures. That's all we have to do is just learn how to play these adventures in our different game systems, the ones we're comfortable with. So we have to kind of tailor them and homebrew them in such a way that, hey, we can actually play this game and make it feel right. So, barbaric fantasy has its place from the Conan and Xena stories. It's different from the Middle Earth. Middle Earth, hobbits, different races. The Middle Earth is somewhat more civilized than a barbaric world. Even the Rangers and the Bjornen and things and those types of people still have some well-developed cultures and still behave with each other in a civilized way. But you go back to these barbaric worlds, And people can be ruthless. And your friends are friends for life because you've really learned to trust each other. And your associates may not be friends, maybe friends for a while, but there was a lot of backstabbing back in those days. These were barbaric worlds. They were free and wild in many ways, but they were prone to problems in relationships because people were not that civilized, and they would basically just want to survive. So there was a lot of conflict between groups, but it wasn't so much between countries and territories. It was between people because people were not that cultured yet. Some people were, some people weren't. You had this huge diversity that was really clear-cut, that the uneducated, the uncultured thieves were really a part of society. They were a functioning part of society. They were getting things moved. They were taking care of people. They were doing what they needed to do. And then you had the cultured people doing trade, but at the same time, they were corrupt too. So it was hard to really find someone who was not corrupt. It was hard. And so these are the types of worlds you have to build with barbaric fantasy, is to understand that culture, that mindset, that point in time, and this huge expanse of possibilities around the world, to travel, to know other cultures, to find friends, and to find enemies, to find that glory of finding treasure. This is all part of the story in barbaric fantasy. So, if you need to find the Discord, you'll see down below here. If you go down below where we are right now, down below it'll say like home, about, schedules, and things like that. Look in about, and you'll see some links to click to the YouTube, and you'll see some links to click to the Discord. Yeah, go in if this interests you. Come and share. Put your energy in. If you love to play the 2D20 system from Modiphius, come in and share that. Talk about it. Help other people understand that. Get them involved in your games too. So we need to reach out and connect. The people who are really interested in these types of stories, we need to come together, connect, start sharing stories, sharing the ability to play together in these different RPG systems. That's what this is all about. Barbaric Fantasy RPG is not about any particular game system. It's about opening up the game systems to play Barbaric Fantasy. It's not about video games. There's a video game out there called Conan Exiles, and people are playing that game, and it's all about just choosing what you need on a computer and then moving your character around. That's not RPG. We are doing RPG with players together, building the story, collaborating, telling the story, having fun, talking and sharing and making decisions, rolling dice, and letting it be raw in the moment. And not using computer-generated video games. We're using mind-generated role-playing games. And that's how you really get into this barbaric fantasy feel, is because it's more human. You got to get back in touch with your humanity and kind of get away from these video-generated games and get back in touch with that imagination of being you, a character in the moment, playing with all the possibilities that you can imagine in that moment. And you're not limited by what's being generated by the computer. You are only limited by your imagination to move and manipulate the environment around you in that moment in this role-playing game. So, video-generated, computer-generated games, not involved here. Role-playing, coming together, character sheets, talking, roll that dice. What do you do? How do you respond to that? Okay, that's why we're here, so we can play together in this human human interaction called role-playing games, which are the best games in the world. There's no games better than role-playing games. I don't like video games, personally. I realize people play video games, but I just love that raw feel of telling a story and interacting that story with other people. To me, that's so much better, so much more fun. I just love watching role-playing games on YouTube and on Twitch. And I've spent hours and hours just listening to them while I'm doing other things. It's just so much fun. It's so interesting. It's just so interesting. It's just so fascinating to play these games. So that's why we're here. All right. So my name is Wisdom Hunter. And I realize there's not many people here actually watching right now. But that's okay. We're just starting out. We've only been starting this project since Sunday. Today's Wednesday. That's like 3 days. So, and then within a couple of weeks, we'll have a game up and running. And then it'll be a lot more fun where you can actually see these stories come to life. And you get to feel how they're different from these high fantasy games. And that's what we're working on right now is to get these games set up so that people can see the difference. How is this world of Conan and how is this world of Xena different than these high fantasy D&D games? How is it different? How do you play it? What does it feel like? And how do the game mechanics help you feel that world and get immersed in it? This is what we're going to be working on and presenting in the next few weeks. So as Miss Star Fox says that she's excited to get started and she's already researching her character right now, me too. We're finally getting off the ground. We're finally getting started. This is the first stream. So, got the OBS up here working, and everything seems to be working. Recording this so that we'll always have this available. So everything seems to be working fine. Everything seems to be working fine. And I look forward to get going on this project for Barbaric Fantasy and putting it together and having fun. And just simply having fun. That's what it's all about. All right. I think that's going to do it. You know how to reach us at the Discord, Barbaric Fantasy Rpg. And we'll be around with more videos and more Twitch streams, bringing it up. So I'll be signing off now. GM Wisdom Hunter. Looking forward to getting together with you all and sharing. So I'm going to be signing off now. Any other comments or questions? Nope. Looks like we're good to go. All right, everybody. May you have a wonderful time living, enjoying the sunsets, enjoying the rain, enjoying the wind, enjoying watching plants and trees grow, enjoying the moon in the night sky and the stars, maybe even singing a little song, maybe even playing a little guitar with your own fingers, maybe getting away from videos and getting back into nature. But while we're here on the internet, while we're here with all this technology, it is a real opportunity for us to come together and share these moments of natural life in the world. And then after these games, the idea is to walk outside and look at the moon, look at the clouds, look at what's going on outside, and feel that barbaric nature of the world still there. That the sky and the sun and the moon and the stars are still a part of our life. That we can come and play these games and have fun, and then walk outside and feel a part of the world again. That's the goal. That's really the ultimate goal of these barbaric fantasy games, is to come together, share some stories, and then feel like you want to go back out into nature and walk in the grass barefoot. That's the idea. Climb a tree. This is the idea, is to get that feeling of exploration, to getting back into nature, and that getting to know the world again and being able to walk on the earth, smell the flowers. So these games are going to help us, inspire us to get back in touch with nature at that level, to that wild, ferocious, moment-to-moment survival that we can have in the world, and appreciate it for every moment that we have while we're still alive. People back in these barbaric worlds did not live long. It was wild, and there was a lot of things that could kill a person. So people who lived to an old age in the barbaric fantasy world were amazing people. They had wisdom. They had the abilities to survive many, many things. So when you see an old person in these barbaric fantasy games, they're special people, because there weren't really many old people back in these worlds. A lot of people, when they were young, they would die in fights and battles and wars and poisons, exhaustions and starvations and droughts. There were so many ways that they could die. So people who actually lived to a long, old age were actually much rarer than we have nowadays. Nowadays, like they say, there's more people alive today than have died in the past 2,000 years. Think about that for a second. There's more people alive today than have died in the past 2,000 years. The world has changed a lot. And it used to be that wasn't the case. So it's getting to know these barbaric fantasy worlds and understanding that element of living intensely on the earth, on the world, on a horseback, on a ship that creaks, on sandals, hardened leather. So, okay, I think we're done. I think we're done with this stream broadcast. I think we'll move on. See everybody around. So this is Wisdom Hunter signing off. I'll be back every week, give a little show like this, and then we'll be ready in the next couple of weeks with the game. And then the fun will start. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.